I never told my son what was actually sitting behind the reinforced door of my engine yard's north warehouse. When he married a woman who could sniff out money through solid steel, I made certain she'd never lay eyes on the paperwork. But while I was home trimming my rose bushes, my shop manager called me sounding like the building was on fire. "Boss, your daughter-in-law just pulled up. She's got a locksmith with her and a man with a flatbed truck." I didn't panic. I'd been waiting almost 3 months for exactly this moment, and what happened over the next few hours ended her little scheme once and for all. If you're sticking around for this one, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe so you catch the next story too. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is where you are. I genuinely like knowing who's out there listening with me. It was just past 10 and the marina had gone quiet, nothing but rigging lines tapping against masts in the evening breeze. My name is Harold Vance. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent 43 years pulling dead marine engines apart and rebuilding them stronger than they came. People look at me now, gray stubble, an oil-stained cap, a stiff hip from a hoist accident back in '96, and they assume there goes a simple old mechanic. What they don't know is what it took to build Vance Marine Works out of one borrowed dock slip and a single toolbox I still keep in my truck. They don't know what 4 decades of watching customers pay or dodge their invoices teaches a man about reading people. My phone buzzed on the counter. Not many people have that number. One of them is Curtis Boone, 59, a former Coast Guard petty officer who's run my shop floor with total loyalty for 16 years. I answered. "Harold, it's starting," Curtis said. "Slow down," I told him. "What's happening?" "Renata's out front of the north building," he said. "She's got a locksmith and some guy with a truck waiting. She's holding papers, showing them to anybody who'll look." I set my coffee down. "Let her through, Curtis. No police, no interference. Pull the crew back and let her walk right up to that door herself." Curtis paused the way a man does when he thinks his boss has finally lost the plot. "You certain, Harold? She means business tonight." "I'm certain," I said, my palm resting near a small photo of my late wife, Eleanor, propped on the windowsill. "Let her cut every lock she wants. Tonight she's going to learn exactly what kind of trap she built for herself." I hung up. To understand how a grown woman ended up outside my warehouse with a locksmith at 10 at night, you'd need to rewind almost 3 months, to the day a cold, uneasy feeling first crawled up my spine. My son Mark is 33. Good-hearted kid, a little too trusting, comes from both his mother and me, honestly. He handles the front-of-house side of the shop, smiling at customers and explaining why a rebuilt outboard costs what it costs. When Eleanor died 4 years back, I promised her at the graveside I'd watch over that boy like a hawk, because Mark has never once considered that someone could want to use him. He married Renata about 18 months ago. She calls herself a lifestyle brand consultant, whatever that actually means. She's got a ring light, a laptop, and an online following pushing 40,000 people where she talks about abundance and mindset between sponsored posts for teeth whitening kits. Before Mark, she never had much. After Mark, she suddenly developed strong opinions about our family's finances. It started at their anniversary dinner at a seafood place downtown. I was there in my one decent blazer, content just watching my son hold his wife's hand across the table, when Renata set her glass down a little too firmly. "Harold," she said, flashing that camera-ready smile. "I drove past the yard last week, that big warehouse at the north end, past the fuel dock, the one that's always locked. What exactly is that place?" I kept eating. I set my fork down slow, but every alarm bell in my head started going off at once. I had never once discussed that warehouse with Renata. I'd barely discussed it with Mark. "It's just an old storage shed," I told her, keeping my tone easy. "Rusted siding, a padlock, nothing but spare parts and dust." "Why do you ask?" She laughed, breezy. "No reason, just seems like a lot of prime waterfront acreage for a junk closet. You know what land's worth around here?" Ever think about selling it? I know developers who'd fight each other for that lot. I glanced at my son. Mark was beaming at his wife like she'd just said something brilliant, completely blind to the flicker of hunger that crossed her face for half a second before the smile snapped back into place. My gut, the same gut that spent 4 decades spotting a con artist before he even opened his mouth, told me something was very wrong. I paid the bill, same as always. Renata never reaches for her wallet. Driving home, I thought about Eleanor, about the two of us sleeping in the cab of a pickup truck the first 2 summers of building this business, about every callus on my hands that paid for the comfortable life my son now takes for granted. I decided right then I wasn't handing any of it over to a woman who married my son for a payday she assumed was owed to her. The knock came the next morning at 9 sharp. I opened the door to find Mark and Renata on my porch, Renata clutching a slick leather folder like she was pitching a network deal. "Dad," Mark said, grinning, "Renata's been up half the night putting something together for you. She thinks you're really going to love this." I let them in, poured coffee, sat while Renata spread a glossy presentation across my kitchen table, pie charts, projected tax savings, a bright red circle drawn around the North Warehouse on a satellite map. "Harold, you're hemorrhaging money on that shed," she said, voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Property taxes eating away at a building doing absolutely nothing. At your age, you should be relaxing, not carrying dead weight. I've got developer contacts who'd pay top dollar, no hassle, I'd manage the whole thing. You wouldn't lift a finger." Mark nodded along like he was reading scripture. "Dad, she's right, don't stress yourself over it, let her handle it." I flipped through her paperwork slowly, playing the overwhelmed old man, letting her think every word was sinking in. She'd clearly done her homework pulling public tax records. What she didn't know is that public tax records don't tell a soul what's truly inside that building. "This is a lot to take in," I said, tapping the folder. "I don't sign anything the same day I read it. Give me a week to think it over." Her jaw tightened just slightly, the first crack in that polished smile. "Of course, Harold. Just remember, opportunities like this don't sit around forever." As I walked them to the door, I caught her eyes drift toward the hallway closet where I keep a fireproof filing cabinet. She held that gaze 2 seconds too long. 2 seconds was all I needed. I spent that Sunday morning with my coffee, staring at that cabinet, replaying the hunger in her eyes. People like Renata can't hide greed once it's tasted something. I decided not to confront her outright. If I accused her directly, Mark would defend her with his whole chest and I'd become the bitter old man trying to sabotage his son's marriage. I had to let her believe she was winning. I had to feed the greed until it made her careless enough to reveal exactly who she was, in her own words, to her own husband. I called Curtis that afternoon. "I need copies of the old lease paperwork on the North Building," I told him. "Cover pages only, my name as owner, tax parcel numbers, nothing about the Harbor Authority contract. Make it look like an ordinary empty storage shed." "We setting a trap, Harold?" Curtis asked. "We're baiting one," I said. 2 weeks of silence followed. I ignored her calls, dodged her texts, let her stew. The crack finally showed on a Tuesday morning outside Mark's small bait shop downtown, the one thing that's entirely his, built with 3 years of saved-up earnings. I was walking up with his usual coffee when I saw a tow truck backed against his delivery van, the hydraulic lift already grinding it off the pavement. Mark stood on the sidewalk pale, phone in hand, while a man with a clipboard looked at him without an ounce of sympathy. "Dad," Mark said when he spotted me, voice cracking, "they're saying we missed 3 lease payments on the van." "That's not possible, Renata handles the business account, she set up autopay months ago." I turned to the driver. "There's got to be some mix-up here, friend." He didn't even glance up. "Recovery order came through yesterday, 90 days delinquent, not my problem." I was already reaching for my checkbook when tires screeched behind us. Renata's leased sedan swung into the lot and she came running, hair a mess, makeup smeared, nothing like the polished woman filming skincare routines for a living. "Stop right there," she shouted at the driver, "this is a banking error, put that vehicle down now." He crossed his arms. "Account's empty, ma'am, payments bounced." I watched her hands shake as she dialed her phone, pacing tight circles, hissing about a security flag and fraud protection. 10 frantic minutes later she shoved the phone at the driver and whatever voice answered bought her 30 more days. The van came down. Mark hugged her, relieved, telling her not to worry about it. But over Mark's shoulder, for one bare second, her mask slipped completely, and what I saw looking back at me wasn't embarrassment. It was raw fear. Women running six-figure consulting businesses don't have their husband's delivery van repossessed over a glitch. They don't pace an alley shaking like they're chasing a fix. My suspicion, already sharpened, turned into something close to certainty. Renata was drowning in debt and had been quietly siphoning from Mark's shop to keep her head above water, all while hunting for a bigger score to bail herself out entirely. That bigger score, I now understood, was my North warehouse. That Friday they showed up at my door with overnight bags, claiming a burst pipe had flooded their apartment. I knew better. A woman that desperate doesn't check into her father-in-law's guest room over a busted pipe, she checks into a hotel and lets insurance handle it. But I smiled and gave them the spare room anyway, because I needed her close. I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 in the morning I heard the third stair from the bottom groan the way it always does. I lay still and listened to soft footsteps cross the hallway toward my study. Through the crack in the door I watched Renata kneeling in front of my filing cabinet, a penlight clenched between her teeth, working the lock with a thin metal pick she'd clearly practiced with. She wasn't a professional. She was a desperate woman who'd run out of patience. I let her get the drawer open before I flipped the hallway light on. She gasped and spun around, caught cold. "Renata," I said, keeping my voice groggy, "what on earth are you doing down here in the dark?" She recovered fast, hand over her heart, breathless. "Harold, I'm so sorry, I couldn't sleep, I was looking for water and got turned around." "Kitchen's the other way," I said gently, "let me show you." Once she'd gone back up, I checked the drawer. She'd found the folder with my property records, and in her rush to close things up she'd left it sticking out just enough to confirm exactly what she'd been hunting for. The next morning I hired Owen Castillo, a private investigator I'd used twice before when I needed the truth fast. 3 days later he slid into a booth across from me at the diner near the marina with a thick folder and tired eyes. "You were right to be suspicious, Harold," he said. "Renata's consulting business is mostly smoke. 2 paying clients in the last year. Everything online is staged for the followers, and the followers are the real product. She sells them a course on financial freedom while she's got nothing herself. How's she affording the car, the wardrobe?" "Credit," Owen said, "maxed 6 different ways. 2 years back she put nearly everything, plus a chunk of family money, into some online trading platform that turned out to be a scam. Lost most of it in a single weekend. When the banks cut her off, she went looking for private lenders. She currently owes close to $160,000 to a man named Nico Reyes, who doesn't run a bank, Harold. He runs a very different kind of operation on the east side." My stomach went cold. "There's more," Owen said, sliding another page across. "She's been skimming from Mark's shop account for close to 10 months. Small amounts dressed up as supply orders. That's why the van's been bouncing payments, she's been redirecting that money elsewhere. If this keeps up, that shop closes by end of season." I sat there with the same cold, focused calm I used to feel standing over a dead engine, already knowing which bolt to loosen first. She'd put my son's life's work at risk, put debt collectors on his doorstep, and lied to his face daily while doing it. That was a line that doesn't get uncrossed. "Want me to call it in?" Owen asked. "I've got a contact in financial crimes." I shook my head. "If police pick her up now, Mark thinks it's a misunderstanding. He visits her, forgives her, believes every excuse fed to him through a jail phone. He needs to see it happen with his own eyes, so there's no story left for her to spin afterward." That afternoon I drove to the shop and found Curtis in the back office. "I need a fake inventory sheet," I told him, "something valuable enough that a desperate person would risk everything for it." "What kind of valuable?" Curtis asked. "Marine salvage electronics," I said, "untraceable, high resale, sitting in the north building, made to look like it's been off the books for years." We spent 2 hours building a manifest, recovered navigation systems and sonar gear supposedly pulled from decommissioned surplus vessels, valued at roughly $380,000, listed as unregistered, sitting in the north warehouse. I stamped it confidential in red and slid it into the same drawer Renata had already cracked once, buried deep enough she'd have to dig, shallow enough she'd find it fast. Then I had 3 hidden cameras installed in my study, disguised as a smoke detector, a clock radio, a phone charger, every angle covering that cabinet. That night at dinner, Renata was practically vibrating with nervous energy, her knee bouncing under the table, and I knew the trap was working exactly as planned. Around midnight the floorboard groaned again. I watched on my phone as she slipped into the study, found the folder, and read every word with her mouth slightly open, like someone staring at a winning ticket. She photographed every page with shaking hands before creeping back upstairs. The next morning I slipped a small listening device into the lining of her handbag while she showered. I told myself it was the only way left to protect my son. That afternoon, sitting in my truck 2 blocks away, I heard her make the call. "Nico, listen to me," she said, her voice climbing into a register I hadn't heard from her before. "I found something bigger, way bigger than the shop money. There's a warehouse, my father-in-law's storage building, full of recovered marine electronics. Has to be close to 400 grand sitting there completely off the books. No insurance claim, nobody watching it." The voice that answered was flat and low. "You said that about the shop money too, Renata. You've got 5 days. This is real," she said. "I saw the paperwork myself. Give me the crew, I'll get you the door codes, you clean the place out in 1 night, take your cut, I disappear." "And your husband?" the voice asked. She didn't hesitate. "He'll never know it was me. Let him think it was random. I'm done with him and this whole sad little marina town once this clears." I sat in my truck feeling something in my chest go cold and still. She wasn't just stealing from an old man's shed. She was willing to let armed men break into a building carrying her own husband's business name, then vanish without a second thought for what happened to Mark afterward. Whatever mercy I'd been holding on to disappeared right then. What she and her hired men didn't know is that the North Warehouse hasn't held spare parts in 5 years. 3 years ago, a regional maritime task force approached me quietly about a piece of land they needed, isolated waterfront, easy barge access, easy to secure. I leased them the North Building and the surrounding acre as a secure equipment and evidence staging site for coastal interdiction operations. From the outside it still looks like a rusted-out shed I never bothered fixing up. That's exactly the point. Inside, it's wired with motion sensors and silent alarms tied directly to a federal task force dispatch line, with an armed detail on rotation, because sometimes what gets stored there overnight is active case evidence. I gave her the full 5 days her creditor demanded. During that stretch I drove Mark out to his mother's old flower bed one evening, telling him I had something of hers to show him. He didn't argue, he never does with me. We parked in a dark lot across from the marina and I opened my laptop, showing him the security feed from inside a building he'd walked past his entire life without a second thought. I told him the truth plainly, without softening a single word, that his wife had lost her savings to a scam, owed a dangerous man real money, had been quietly draining his shop account for the better part of a year, and had just sold out a fake inventory list to a criminal crew to save herself, telling that crew he'd never know it was her. Mark went white and silent in a way I'd never seen from my son. He wanted to argue, to defend her the way he always had, but the words wouldn't come. I put my hand over his and told him to watch the screen, because in a few minutes he was going to see exactly who his wife really was. At midnight, headlights swept across the lot. A dark van rolled up outside the North Building and 3 men climbed out, two broad-shouldered ones carrying rifles slung across their chests, and Renata behind them in dark clothes, holding bolt cutters like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Mark made a sound beside me I'll never forget, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. We heard her voice clear through the feed. "There's no cameras on this fence, the old man doesn't believe in security systems, he thinks nobody wants his junk. I've got the door code memorized, we're in and out in 20 minutes. One of the men grunted, "This better be real or you're the one explaining it to Nico." "It's real," she snapped, "I saw the manifest myself." She cut the chain, the gate screeched open, she crossed the yard and punched in the door code she'd photographed off my fake paperwork. The moment she and the two armed men stepped through that threshold and crossed the sensors, the entire lot lit up like daylight. A federal siren cut through the night. Mark grabbed my arm so hard it left a mark. Armed agents poured out from 3 directions, weapons raised, shouting for everyone to hit the ground. The 2 men with rifles dropped immediately, hands behind their heads, faces in the dirt. Men like that know exactly what a losing position looks like. Renata didn't go down quietly. She screamed it was a mistake, that she was just visiting her father-in-law's property, right up until an agent had her face down in the gravel with her wrists zip-tied behind her back. Through the feed we watched her sob into the dirt the same way she once cried on camera about a cancelled spin class. Mark didn't say a word the whole drive home. He just stared out the window, and somewhere past the marina I heard him start to cry, quiet, the way a grown man cries when something inside him breaks clean in half. 3 days later, sitting at my kitchen table, his phone rang with a number neither of us recognized. He looked at me and I nodded. He put it on speaker. The automated voice announced a collect call from the county detention facility. Renata's voice came through next, high and frantic, already spinning a story about being in the wrong place at the wrong time, begging him to call a lawyer, to wire bail money, telling him none of it was what it looked like. Mark sat there listening to her lie to him one more time, and something in his face finally hardened all the way through. He took the phone from my hand himself, because this was his fight to finish, and said, "I heard everything, Renata. I heard you say I'd never know it was you." Then he hung up and blocked the number, and he didn't shed one more tear over her after that. Federal charges followed for all 3 of them: conspiracy, attempted theft of federal property, weapons charges for the 2 men she'd hired. A judge denied every one of them bail. Renata was looking at years, not months, and no lawyer alive could talk her way out of what 3 federal agents had captured on camera. Mark filed for divorce that same week. The shop, finally free of whatever she'd been bleeding out of it, started climbing back to where it used to be within a month. He hired a part-time clerk, started sleeping again, started laughing with regular customers the way he used to before she ever walked into our lives. About 6 weeks later, I sat him down at his mother's old kitchen table and slid a small brass key across to him. He looked at it, confused, the same way his mother used to look at me right before I surprised her with something. I told him a man who spends his life pulling engines out of dying boats learns early that you never keep your real treasure somewhere a stranger might think to look. 3 years before Eleanor passed, we'd quietly set up a trust in Mark's name alone, completely separate from the shop, the house, anything easily traced back to us. Renata had spent a year and a half hunting for a fortune hidden in a rusted warehouse, never once suspecting the real inheritance had been sitting untouchable in his name the whole time, protected by paperwork she never thought to look for, because she never once believed an old man in an oil-stained cap could outthink her. He hugged me the way he used to when he was 7 years old and scared of a thunderstorm, and I held onto my son and didn't let go for a good long while. That Sunday evening I sat out on the dock behind the shop with a glass of bourbon, watching the last of the light go orange over the water. I thought about Eleanor, about the promise I made her at the graveside, about every callus this business ever put on my hands. I raised my glass to the water and said it out loud, just for her to hear. Greed always shows its true face eventually, if you're patient enough to wait for it. You can build the prettiest life on top of a lie, but sooner or later the foundation cracks, and everybody standing on it goes down with it. What actually protects a family isn't money sitting in a warehouse or an account somebody can find if they dig hard enough. It's the years you put in when nobody's watching. The promises you keep long after the person you made them to is gone. If this story reminded you that karma always finds its way home, hit that like button for me, and tell me, have you ever had someone marry into your family who turned out to be after something other than love? Tell me down in the comments, I read every single one. Until next time, take care of the people who take a bullet for you, and keep a close eye on the ones who wouldn't.